We have got a great subject to talk about today, because obviously the last 12 months have flown by so quickly, and I think you'll all agree. The payroll department has really seen a dramatic change, and it's been asked for so many so many different things, and reports and everything else. So today we've got Gabrielle and Lorna from ADP, and they're going to discuss a very, very relevant subject: understanding your payroll impact and the business case for change. Okay, as I mentioned, today's webinar will be recorded, and it is live streamed, and we'll also be able to send you the recording. If you do have any questions, please ask those in the Q&A box, and we will get to answer those at the end of today's webinar. So let's start off. We have Gabrielle. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Mel, and thank you everyone for the time today to dial in. My name's Gabrielle Weems. I'm the UK marketing manager here at ADP. So I support all of the campaigns that we have, the research that we do, the rollout and execution of those. And I've been at ADP now, I think it's coming up to about 6 years. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And Lorna, over to you.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, I'm Lorna Wake. I'm the CFO, so that's the Chief Financial Officer for the UK and Ireland for ADP. And I've now, I think I'm 5 days away from my 5-year anniversary. So I've been at ADP for 5 years. But I, as the CFO, I'm responsible for juggling and maintaining the finances for the UK and Ireland business.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Okay, so over to you, Gabrielle.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mel. So good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're dialed in from. Welcome everyone to the webinar today. Now, it's a bit of an introduction slide here, and I wanted to kick off by saying, you probably know this already, right? There's no getting around the fact that payroll is complex. So it's the connection between the individual, the government, and the organisation. So as you grow across borders and cultures, you're obviously going to encounter different languages, different currencies, working in different time zones. So it's just not a surprise, right? Global payroll is such a complex area of operation. And as you can see from the data points on this slide, it talks around some of the area of that complexity. Now, pre-COVID, for many multi-country organisations, being paid was almost a measure that your global payroll operations worked. But there's no escaping that the global pandemic has certainly put the spotlight on the payroll function. Organisations are now looking for their global payroll systems to provide things like insight, real-time data, and to ensure that their processes have the agility and flexibility to adapt quickly to new realities. So, with so much to think about when it comes to global payroll, you're probably not the only business looking towards the global payroll function thinking, well, where do I start? And that brings us to my first slide here. So hopefully today, the research, no, next slide please, Mel, thank you. Hopefully today, the research that I'm going to share with you will help in answering some of these questions. So ADP have recently partnered with Forrester Consulting Group to provide an objective and an impartial overview of our global payroll solutions. And it's my pleasure to share the results here with you today. So I'm going to kickstart by talking through the research itself, after which I'm going to hand over to Lorna, and she's going to give us a little bit of a live demonstration of the total economic impact calculator, which is a tool Forrester have created as a direct result of the research. And this tool basically creates a personalized business case for your organization, allowing you to better understand the benefits and the direct cost savings associated with a unified ADP Global Payroll solution. And of course, we'll have some time for questions at the end of the webinar too. So with all that in mind, let's get started and take a look at the total economic impact of a global payroll technology investment, which brings us on to the next slide. So the first thing I want to touch on is what is a TEI and what are the differences between a TCO study, an ROI and a TEI. So if you look at the slide here and the table there on your right, this gives a demonstration of that. So A TCO study mainly looks at the IT costs and the impact of moving to a new solution. So it's a total cost of ownership, but very much associated with the IT impact. And ROI, of course, not only takes into account the IT impact, but also looks at the wider business impact, considering things like user efficiency and business effectiveness. Now, a TEI, on the other hand, considers the business impact, meaning the results of Forrester's research looks at the risk mitigation and strategic impact alongside the IT costs involved. So ultimately, a TEI study is giving you a much bigger picture. It's also worthwhile noting, before I move on to the next slide, while assessing ADP's global payroll solutions, Forrester also took into account the flexibility of our products, meaning they have considered what the solution will be able to offer in the future for a customer, allowing the customer to think about the impact of that solution in the long run. So in terms of kind of scalability or agility. So just an extra little point I wanted to make there. So moving on. The first things that I would like to have a look at is the multi-step approach to evaluating the impact of ADP's global payroll. So the first step that Forrester took is called the due diligence stage. And this involved Forrester investigating ADP Global Payroll solution itself. So analysing documentation, holding stakeholder interviews, bringing in kind of their own research analysis, insights and data, which they benchmarked against ADP's global payroll solution. Now, after they'd finished this stage, then came kind of the client interviews. So Forrester researched interviewed 4 ADP global payroll customers. And these customers were global companies acting across different regions, all of which were different sizes. And you can see on the table presented on the screen there. Now, after these interviews and of course the due diligence stages, Forrester was then able to go away and develop what was called a composite organisation. And essentially, this is a fictive organisation, combining kind of the characteristics of the 4 organisations that Forrester had interviewed. So the composite organisation was then used as a basis to build the financial model that quantifies the potential global payroll benefits, which of course we will touch upon later. Ultimately, the composite organisation is kind of the benchmark organisation used in the TEI calculator, which will allow you to benchmark your own organisation against, therefore allowing you to gain insight on how an ADP global payroll solution might be able to support your global payroll requirements and what benefits, both financial and otherwise, you're likely to see as a result. So after the composite organisation was built, just to kind of touch on the last point here, the Forrester then produced their findings back to the 4 ADP clients. They had to review it and it was finally signed off to make sure that they were aligned with the final piece of research. And after that, the TEI calculator and the white paper were published. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background as to where we went with the research and how kind of Forrester went step by step through that kind of multi approach there. The next slide I'm going to talk through now talks a little bit more detailed around the structure behind the research. So we're looking at the results at this stage. So with Forrester conducting its investigations, the first thing that's important to note is that all of the organisations that Forrester interviewed struggled with common challenges prior to implementing an ADP global payroll solution. And there's probably some of you on the line there looking at these and probably resonating with you. The first one that our clients kind of reported against was the high complexity of the payroll solution landscape. So all the decision makers reported multiple disconnected payroll system vendors in different locations. And because of this, they face challenges with system silos and process inefficiencies. The second common challenge that we found was around kind of workforce visibility and data unification. So before ADP, these organisations reported struggling with the challenge to leverage accurate and reliable data across their organisations, which often led back to inefficient payroll processes. So to put it simply, they were simply lacking a single source of the truth when it came to their data. And the last common challenge was around managing compliance and the mitigation of risk. Now, of course, every country has its own tax jurisdictions, payroll requirements, banking processes or procedures. And all of the clients said that kind of pre-ADP, it was simply an ongoing challenge to effectively track and apply regulatory change to remain compliant over different reasons. So if we move on to the next slide now, having presented the common challenges the client faced before ADP, I now want to provide you with a bit of an overview to the key benefits that Forrester identified. But before I do, I think it's worthwhile probably mentioning the results of the study can be split into two parts. So quantitative results and non-quantifiable results. So when I talk about quantitative results, what do I mean? So ultimately, it's results that we can see through data. So for example, a financial impact on the cost on savings as a result of using ADP's global payroll solution and therefore remaining compliant to local country legislations or regulations. Non-quantifiable results, on the other hand, are kind of results meaning that they weren't necessarily in data form as such, but all organisations reported against these types of results in the early interview stages. So, for example, improved decision making that they were able to conduct from better data access or integrity. Things like employee engagement from self-service kind of platforms that we offered. So, both of these results, both quantitative and non-quantifiable, were merged to produce the TEI case study. This, of course, was then reviewed by our clients to validate the results. So, as you can see on the slide here, once the results were confirmed by our clients, the biggest benefit reported and the main quantifiable benefit was, perhaps not surprisingly, the reduction in compliance costs. This was closely followed by an improved payroll process efficiency and then better data insight and transparency. So if we go to the next slide here, what I'm going to do is break it down a little bit first. So let us look at the biggest benefit stated by our customers, and that was the reduction in compliance costs. So compliance and risk reduction were key drivers for organizations choosing ADP as their global payroll provider. So working with a global vendor such as ADP really drastically reduced the compliance costs as seen in the COMPOSITE organization. And this was mainly down to the reduction in compliance related penalty costs. So organizations would have perhaps otherwise encountered. And what I'm just going to do, I'm going to read the quote on the screen there because I think it tells a little bit of a story. So the difference between being non-compliant to getting ADP payroll and achieving compliance made a material financial difference. As we implemented these solutions, we found a significant number of areas we were not in compliance. So for this particular organization, not only was ADP saving them costs against regulation penalties, but it was also highlighting areas that they didn't even know they were breaching legislation. So it's a pretty scary thought there. So as I say, reduction in compliance costs was kind of the number one benefit that we saw from the quantifiable side. And if we move to the second slide here, Mel, the second kind of biggest quantifiable benefit, which is improved payroll efficiency. And this benefit was of 1.4 million for the COMPOSITE organization. So these payroll efficiency gains can be mainly attributed to the less time that was needed to perform manual or say mundane tasks. So for larger countries, ADP's processing service, for example, reduced payroll effort by 30%. And for smaller companies, that was up to 75% when they use ADP's fully managed service. So Forrester detailed that the clients who had moved to ADP for their global payroll needs ultimately avoided significant manual effort and data input, which of course freed up their teams and their resources to focus on more strategic initiatives. Now the next slide here, moving on, details kind of an overview of all the main quantifiable benefits. So it's clear that the benefits go beyond savings in cost from a compliance perspective and improved payroll process efficiency. These also include things like employee retention, payroll reporting efficiencies, and cost avoidance on continued use of legacy systems. So definitely some interesting results there. Now, if we click over to the next slide, I'd like to touch more along kind of the non-quantifiable benefits reported in Forrester's research. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the study can kind of be categorized into two key themes, or the results can. First one being quantifiable, so stuff that we can look at through data, like cost savings on becoming compliant. And then, of course, non-quantifiable, so things like employee engagement through an improved employee experience. So the non-quantifiable benefits reported can be covered really across these 4 points you can see on the screen there. So improved decision-making for better data access and integrity. So the interviewed clients all said using ADP's global payroll solution had given them kind of better access to data. And this benefit of better insights and transparency was reported to increase over time. One client actually said that they had become more strategic in terms of their operations because of the real-time data that they now had access to. Another point you can see on the screen here is the improved employee experience was also reported amongst all of the 4 clients that Forrester interviewed. So access to ADP's global payroll solutions had really positively impacted the employee experience. So, for example, employee self-service, easy access to requesting annual leave, or simply accessing their online payslips. And interestingly on this, clients reported that employee satisfaction surveys actually increased after implementing ADP. So there may have been a longer term impact there on things like reduction on employee absence or lower employee turnover, things like that. Increased flexibility to integrate into future markets. And this was a really key one and a really interesting point for me. Clients reported ADP's global payroll solution helped them to more easily integrate into additional markets. So whether this came through acquisition or organic growth, they were able to scale up and down as needed. And I think that if the last 12 months has told us anything right, is that kind of having the agility to have a system in place that's able to either decrease or increase and grow alongside your organization is just so important to future-proofing and preparing, especially if you're thinking about any expansion plans. And then the last benefit was increased security. So organizations that Forrester had interviewed stated ADP's global security standards was one of the biggest benefits on the qualitative side there. So moving on to the last slide, I'll just summarize and then I'm going to hand over to Lorna, who will take us through the TEI calculator. But to wrap up, I think it's probably fair to say in the case of ADP's Forrester TEI study, we've had some pretty remarkable results. The overview slide that you can see here shows some financial figures from the Forrester study. What is quite remarkable is the return on investment. So this was calculated at 134%. In addition, the average stating benefits was $5.9 million, not to mention the net present value at $3.4 million, with an average payback period of approximately about 12 months, which Forrester indicated was actually extremely good in comparison to other TEIs that they'd conducted. So I know I've spoken around the financial benefits throughout the deck and so far, but I want to go, but I think it's fair to say it goes beyond just the financial gains, as it were. You know, we've seen several different benefits reported alongside the value chain. And the quote here on the right from the customer interviewed really kind of highlights this, and I think it's a great summary. So the ability to get globally consistent and improved employee experience, efficiency, cost savings, and then a data set to inform the business is huge. So the clients interviewed have really saw great benefits moving to an ADP global payroll solution. And with that being said, it's now time for me to hand over to Lorna. And Lorna, I believe you're going to start sharing your screen and talk us through the TEI calculator, which anyone viewing today is able to use to start building out their own business case to see how much they could save with an ADP global payroll solution investment. So on that note, I will hand over to you, Lorna.
Thanks very much, Gabrielle. Can I just check, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So I'm just going to do a quick demo of the tool that has been built by Forrester's. The tool is very straightforward and it's really easy to use. So first of all, I'll take you through the tabs before I start actually demonstrating the tool. So in this tab, we can see this is where the inputs are. So this just kind of takes you through a little bit of an introduction, as Gabrielle has kind of gone through all of the detail. Next, to be able to get your results, you need to register your details. So I've just filled in my details here, and you can't get the results until you do fill in those details. That is a requirement, and as you can see, you're not able to get those results before registration is completed. Then also on this tab, we can see this is where the methodology, so kind of the background, again, Gabrielle's gone through this, but this is included in the tools. So if you want to recap, this just gives you the background as to the detail that Forrester went into on their study. It provides a little bit of detail around the tool methodology. There's also a disclaimer that this is used for guidance. So it is a business case model, but it gives you a guidance. It won't give you 100% accuracy for your business, but you certainly can play with the tool and validate the tool based on your financials. There is a little bit around disclosures and a little bit around the TEI methodology that Forrester has developed. And then also for non-finance people, this is a glossary of terms. So it just gives you a little bit of more detail around what each of the terms mean. So just going back into the inputs. So here you can see, you can look at the different countries that you're based in, and further down, it looks at how many employees, approximately how many employees you have in each of those countries. You can see, you can use the slider or you can actually use the input. So I'm just going to use the input. And I'm going to pretend that I am the CFO for a global business that is headquartered in the UK. And I have one company, well, I'm in one country in the US and Canada. Then I am in 7 EMEA countries. I am in one country in the APAC region, and I don't have any businesses in the LATAM region. But you can actually go away, and if you can play with the tool. So if you have some future plans, any different future directions, you can input kind of these within the tool, so you can have a play and you can see what potentially that would do to the future benefits of going for a global payroll solution with ADP. So now looking at the employee numbers, I've got approximately 3,000 people in the US. I've got about 40,000 people spread across the EMEA region, and I have about 7,000 people in the APAC region. And you can see here this donut, this pie chart. This is kind of just giving you a little bit of a short snippet of what benefits you could see based on the structure of your company, your global business. And as Mel mentioned, she's gone through the benefits. There's cost, there's compliance cost avoidance, the payroll efficiencies in your smaller countries and then your larger countries. The improvement on retention has a financial impact, and direct cost avoidance where you have changed from your legacy solution to your new ADP solution. And then there are some benefits in terms of payroll reporting efficiencies as well. So then I go and I click on the download the full results. And as mentioned, you need to register your details to be able to get those results. So I've populated this already. I'm not a current ADP client, but I would like ADP to contact me about their products and services because I'm actively looking out there on the marketplace. So then I press see results. Okay, that's working. So then you then start to come to the results pages. And as you can see, for my company, for my global business, I'm going to get 89% return on investment. And from a finance perspective, I want to see this number as big as possible because we'll look at the business, we'll look at different business cases in where we want to invest. And the higher the return on investment, the bigger the priority will be from a finance perspective. The payback period, again, from a finance perspective, we'll want this to be as short as possible. But in terms of a 7-month payback period, that's a really good short term. So again, that's likely to go high up on the finance agenda because of that short payback period. And then looking at the net present value, again, that's showing that you've got a good return on investment from actually investing in your global payroll solution. I've mentioned this is used as a guidance, so if you look at the results, it does give you quite a lot in terms of details of breakdowns of the cost assumptions that Forresters have used using that composite organisation. So looking at what are your potential costs and therefore when your benefits start kicking in as well, and what those benefits look like against your costs. And it does that looking at all of the different benefit elements that Gabrielle has mentioned. So the good thing, I mean, looking at it from a finance perspective, you can use this as a good guide, a starting guide, because then you can start looking in your financials to look at actually validating that to see whether this is reflective for your organisation. So it's a great starting point from a finance perspective. And as I scroll down, it starts to give you the detail behind all of the assumptions for all of those key elements as well. So there's a lot of detail there for your finance department, for any kind of department that's going to get involved in this, to provide that kind of guidance of what the tool does, what the potential costs are for the business, and what the potential benefits are as well. And as I've mentioned, you can still keep going back to your inputs schedule, and you can start playing with the different countries and maybe the way that your business is changing in terms of the employee numbers as well. And it gives you just a short summary. So once you start playing with that, these will change as well. So your return on investment may change, and your NPV as well. So as I've mentioned, a really good, easy tool to use that gives you a lot of guidance in terms of setting up a business case. And that's what, from a finance perspective, we would look at. Okay, so Melanie, should we go back to the slides?
Yep. Can you stop sharing your screen and then I'll share mine?
Sharing.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mel. There should be a slide coming up there next, just around questions, if that's okay. Oh, no, demonstration slide, holding slide, and then questions. Fantastic. Cool. So the first things first is, I know, Mel, we probably had a few audience questions come through, so I'll hand over to you in a minute. But what I wanted to do is spend the next kind of 15-20 minutes, Lorna, just speaking directly with you and kind of getting a better idea of what ADP have done over kind of the last 12 months. So research that I found recently from Gartner, actually, they kind of advised there was 3 key levers financial decision makers were making to use kind of controlling their organizational spend, as it were, when we hit kind of the pandemic. And the pandemic effect on finance for organization, it kind of detailed, impacted 3 key areas. So one of which was cost management, the other was cash, preservation, and then remote working enablement. So I suppose I'd quite like to touch each one of those, Lorna, but I think initially what I'd quite like to do is, out of those 3, is there a particular one that really stands out to you that you felt was kind of key ADP priority over the last kind of 12 months, or at least when it first kind of hit the pandemic?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Gabrielle. And for me, it wasn't necessarily about controlling the spend during the pandemic, although that, of course, is important. More the key challenge for ADP was, how do we keep the business going? We're a service organisation, so ADP is well equipped, or was well equipped to cope with the pandemic. And in this situation, we can really help our clients, particularly those who aren't in such a strong position. We've really got the advantage of what I would call a more robust business model, where we have a recurring revenue stream from the services and the technologies that we provide to our clients. So we're not necessarily impacted as much from a financial perspective as some other businesses, such as they rely on one-off transactions, they're a retail business, etc. So the really key priority for us was making sure, like, how do we keep the business going? And to be able to do that, particularly when the pandemic hit and the lockdowns started to hit, the top key priority is we need to make sure we keep our employees safe. And we have to continue to provide the solutions and services to our clients as well. So in the Gartner study, you mentioned those 3 key areas. So that remote working enablement was very key to us. So it was crucial we could get everyone working from home successfully. And for the UK and Ireland and across the ADP group, we have our business continuity plans. We've already got those in place. And of course, we had looked at the scenario around if there's any office closures. So all of our associates within the UK and Ireland had laptops. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case for the whole of ADP. We actually did have to go through quite an intensive exercise of rolling out 3,000 laptops to some of our associates, and for the IT teams to be able to build up the infrastructure to ensure that they could work from home, and we had ensured business continuity across the board. So to put that into context for the group, we've got 58,000 people, and all of those employees are working from home. And within those plans, we'd only really planned for one office to close. So kind of one of the key things for us, we were already using WebEx. So we had to put a policy out there of, right now, don't use video. We need to preserve the bandwidth to make sure that the infrastructure is in place and is supported. So for our clients, the major advantage of that is that ADP has the tools, we have the processes in place to make sure their people get paid, during a very significantly worrying time for everybody, so that they can then focus on what they need to do to business, to continue their business.
Mm-hmm. I remember actually, obviously from an associate perspective, I was office based kind of pre-pandemic, as it were, and it was just such a, at least from my experience, such a streamlined and smooth transition over just to working from home. It just almost felt normal straight away. I mean, from what you've said there was obviously lots going on in the background, but definitely I think from my associate experience, definitely very smooth. So yeah, so that's interesting to hear around the remote working piece. So obviously we've touched on, or Gartner touched on and cited 3 kind of areas that the pandemic kind of had an impact on finance for organizations. So I suppose my next question would be around that cost management piece. So how did ADP respond to cost management challenges presented over the last 12 months?
To be honest, we are a very cost-focused business, so we're always managing our costs very tightly. But during the pandemic, a lot of that actually happened naturally. We had the lockdowns, which reduced and in most cases prevented any travel from happening. So our events, any events that were in the pipeline or that were due to happen were either cancelled or postponed. So the T&E element, or the travel and entertainment element, those costs naturally came down. We weren't using our offices, so we could reduce the amount of utilities that we were using. So again, that could be reduced. And kind of later on, our natural attrition also reduced in terms of employees staying with us. So our recruitment costs declined as well. We already had some hiring restrictions in place. I mentioned we're a very cost-focused business, so for non-client facing roles, we did have some hiring restrictions already in place, so these just continued. In terms of client-facing roles, when we went into lockdown, we knew we did various scenario modelling, and we knew we'd likely have an impact on our revenue, because our revenue is impacted by our clients having to make redundancies, or our clients actually their business failing, and obviously this was going to have an impact on the economy, and so those 2 things could definitely happen. But from a service perspective, if we're still servicing a client and they have less employees, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have less workload, because in some circumstances we get economies of scale. So it means more we're going to have an impact on our efficiency rather than a reduction in workforce, particularly from the services organisation. Although we did initially have a reduction in work on new business that was coming in. So we did consider furlough for some of our teams that were bringing in new business, such as our implementation teams. And we had a real battle with the ethics of, do we really need to use the furlough schemes? And if we did use the furlough schemes, what's the implications on those teams, on those people? There's the mental health impact. Would they question their value to ADP? Would they be worried and concerned about their future impact on their role? And those are real concerns. So very much with careful consideration, we did decide to furlough employees, but only those employees that really genuinely had no workload at that point in time. And the reason why we made that decision is because our scenario planning showed that in some scenarios, we may need to permanently reduce our workforce. So we thought if we save some money now, we might actually be able to help and save those jobs in the longer term, in the future. So it was the best thing to do. But again, if I put it in context, we furloughed about 44 people out of our 1,000 plus people across UK and Ireland. And I'm really pleased to say that that wasn't for a long period of time. And now they are all back at work, and that scenario hasn't played out. In fact, they've now got plenty to do, because interestingly, COVID has accelerated our sales, particularly for smaller businesses, where there is a real risk that COVID has kind of brought out for them, as in they haven't got a cloud-based payroll solution to access remotely because they couldn't access their offices. In a lot of cases for small businesses, they have very small payroll teams. For really small businesses, that's likely to be one person, so therefore one point of failure. And particularly during that time, and what they've realised is that they want, or they need to focus on their business and have that comfort that their people will get paid, and they'll also have that extra guidance from experts as well. So kind of similar to Gabrielle, what you were talking about in the Forrester study for global payroll, they can see the clear benefits they're going to get from outsourcing their payroll to us.
Yeah. It's interesting, that piece around the furlough bit. Of course, I've been very fortunate over the last 12 months and I've been employed kind of normally. But having to make that decision of the mental health pieces, that's something I've never thought about before. How does that actually impact a member of staff to furlough them? Do they still feel valued? You know, it's a piece I've never actually thought about before. I've just assumed, okay, people are furloughed, they're at home, and that's kind of it. But it's so much bigger than that. So no, it's really interesting to hear.
I think just touching on that point, Gabrielle, I think we're very good at being very open and honest with our teams, and kind of that communication when doing an exercise like that is really key. And especially, I mean, as you've said, the well-being aspect really needs to be taken into account. But thankfully, we're not in a situation where their roles have been permanently impacted. But there are businesses and there are people out there where that permanent impact is actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of wrap up the question, then I'll touch on the final point, which is around kind of cash flow. So cash preservation, how did ADP kind of go about managing cash flow and cash preservation over kind of the last 12 months?
Cash to a business is always really key. I mean, even in good times. And I think as a finance person, you pretty much learn from day one that you can be a profitable business, but if you don't manage your cash well, you could easily run out of cash and essentially go out of business. And that's the same for any business, no matter what size you are, but just some businesses have more cash than others. And we knew that this could have a potential real negative impact for our clients. And as an ADP group, we have a strong cash position. So our group board decided they wanted to use this position to be able to help those clients and for us not to go into that bailiff mode. So we worked in partnership with our clients to make sure our clients which are struggling, where we could support them. So for instance, a number of clients who were struggling and still are struggling, we provided temporary payment term extensions. But that kind of meant for us was that we needed to make sure we were monitoring our cash collections very closely, particularly as the economy worsened. So we increased our cash flow forecast frequency just to keep an eye on that, just to make sure there was no significant impact to us as a business. But I would say it was definitely the right thing to do, and hopefully we have helped save some of those clients, and some of those clients have stayed in business because we have been more accommodating from that perspective. And it's not the only thing we did from a cash perspective. We did something similar where we have seen a number of clients unfortunately having to reduce their employees. And contractually, we can actually go and revisit those prices, we can increase those prices, but that's not what we wanted to do. Instead, we've taken that temporary hit and we've taken a more longer term view, whereas we're hopefully helping to save those clients. And in the medium to long term, as we recover, as we come out of this, it will take some time, but we will recover. Once we start seeing that recovery, the clients will appreciate what we've done. They will be happy, they'll stay happy, and they'll stay with ADP as well.
Absolutely. And I think that probably flows on to the next question. So obviously with ADP taking kind of the stance that it was, you indicated there that reporting and the frequency of it changed as well. And obviously some of the Forrester research detailed that one of the benefits to kind of moving over to ADP was having kind of better visibility of their data and access to real-time data. So again, touching on another piece of research I came across from Gartner again, actually, benchmarks on CFO actions in response to COVID-19. In light of kind of COVID, nearly every organisation has probably had to increase their reporting frequency, right? The adjustments around the way businesses run their routine business performance management processes have included developing forecasts for multiple scenarios, building kind of short-term forecasting models, and increasing the emphasis, I guess, on identifying and or tracking operational metrics. So, and I'm sure you know more about this than I do at ADP. So I suppose that kind of question that I have for you there, Lorna, would be kind of around kind of what have you made kind of change-wise to your reporting? What does pre and post-COVID, I don't know whether post is the right word, but what kind of changes have you made to your reporting? And if so, kind of the changes that you did make, which elements did you kind of have to change?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with the Gartner study, and yes, most definitely we had to make changes. When COVID first hit, it just brought a huge amount of uncertainty. What was going to happen to the economy? How long was it going to last? Would it impact on employment? All of those questions were raised. And in times of uncertainty, we then turn to data. We turn to insights. We want insights. We need knowledge. And we want to look at potential outcomes. So kind of you really need to focus on that and being able to deliver that, particularly in finance. And the business really turns to finance for those as well. So we made quite a number of changes in reporting so that we could get, I mean, you've mentioned it in the Forrester study, we needed real-time data and we needed it quickly. At that point in time, when the pandemic, or just before pre-pandemic, we had started to put our budget together. So this looks at the next financial year. And the pandemic and those lockdowns then started to make it virtually impossible to know what was going to happen within a month. Never mind, we were having to try and look out further to 15, 16 months. So how do you do that? And our GM described it perfectly. So Jeff said, it's like driving a car with the front window completely blacked out and only having the rear view mirror to show you the way. So we were having to try and look at what happened in the past, what happened in the last recession, to try and kind of predict what was going to happen. And so for the budget, our starting point was, right, we're going to have to look at a number of different scenarios. You don't want to look at too many scenarios. You could be into scenario overload. So we needed to look at a more manageable number. And based on a range of forecast predictions of what would happen to the economy, and I've mentioned kind of unemployment hits us as well, we needed to look at those. So we looked at a really extreme worst case scenario where potentially we made no sales whatsoever during this. We've never had that scenario before, but we had to look at it to what is the potential best case scenario and the recovery happening at quite a quick rate, and a couple of other scenarios. So we started with what was quite a significant wide range of scenarios. And the only place that we could start was, okay, let's look at from starting at the midpoint. And as time went on, we started to learn from what actually was happening and start to be able to use that data to then start to narrow the range. So our planning period alone, our budgeting period, went on for a lot longer than normal. So we normally have a quarterly forecasting cycle. We had to actually start to, things were moving so quickly, we had to actually start looking at monthly forecasting. And that meant that we needed to look at our modelling. We needed to simplify our modelling so that we could spit out a monthly forecasting with much quicker speed than what we would normally, and not look at it in as much detail as we normally would do when we do those quarterly forecasting. But we had to make sure we were focusing on the key metrics, so that we're looking at where the potential risk areas are. And for some parts of our business, the data can come in more quickly. So we could look at things like implementing new business. We can look and monitor on a weekly basis rather than waiting for a monthly forecast. And I'd mentioned previously, our business model is pretty robust because we generate those monthly fees, and therefore our revenue stream is predominantly stable, making it normally more easy to predict. But we can be negatively impacted by the decline in the economy in a number of ways. So I've mentioned unemployment, so our clients making redundancies, the business failure, but also when COVID started to hit, clients were actually, they needed to change priorities. So initially the priority was to look at a payroll solution. They've signed a sales contract, but actually they needed to do other things. So they wanted to delay coming onto ADP. Some wanted to stop altogether. And in terms of sales, there was a period of time where companies were putting investments on hold. So it was really key for us to monitor those metrics very closely, as well as I mentioned cash before as well. And we needed to understand the levels of this exposure in order to determine any further actions or what kind of business decisions, such as the furlough that I've talked about as well. So hence the reason moving to monthly forecast to particularly understand any impact on our revenue and future business. Thinking back as well, we also created a watch list of our clients, so those that were in sectors at risk, and understanding their challenges. But as I've mentioned, the rise in unemployment is the biggest risk for us, particularly at the start of the pandemic and the lockdowns. And so we went out to kind of look for really good external data around what could potentially happen with unemployment. So looking for those forecasts, which were actually really easy to obtain, but they were so wide ranging and the challenge was more who's going to be right.
Yeah.
But also, as we started to get into the cycle of the economy, of understanding the economy more and how that was going to hit, we wanted to know, where are we with unemployment and how does ADP's data compare to unemployment? So we rely on the government data. So the ONS, the Office of National Statistics, they provide the unemployment figures. But just as an example of that, we're in March now, like really early March. They've just reported unemployment of 5.1%. This is for the 3 months ended December. So you think it's a 2-month time lag that you're talking about, but actually they're using data to the end of November. So they're actually 3 months behind our data. So our data effectively is more real time than theirs. So that presents a real challenge in itself as well. So we just need to, we use our data. We've now, as I've said, like, as time goes on, we start to understand how the lockdowns, which sectors are really hit. So we look at the job retention scheme, what's going to happen there. We look at the different client sectors and which ones are riskier than others. And we still look at those forecasts that are out there. And thankfully things are still changing, but not as quickly as what they had been. So we've managed to be able to move back to quarterly forecasting, but still monitoring those key metrics very, very closely. Although I say that when we were doing the forecast in December, we weren't counting on a national lockdown because the government was very adamant that they were going to stick to local restrictions. So that's how we forecast. And then they changed their mind very, very quickly. And after December, so we had to revisit our forecast again. So it's still happening, but not to as greater an extent as it was while we were kind of really in the early days. Yeah.
I think that story that you shared, that Jeff had shared, to say it's like driving a car and only being able to look through the back mirror, as it were. I mean, so many people will be able to relate to that, right? Yeah. But as you say, we're getting, things aren't as quickly changing as they were 12 months ago. So I'm sure that helps. Now, I think we are almost coming to the hour. So, Mel, I've got one more slide that I just want to wrap up on. If you could flick onto that, please. And then I'm not too sure if we've got any time for audience questions. So thank you, Laura, for going through the TEI calculator, of course, and obviously just sharing some of your feedback and your opinions and stories there from how ADP have kind of been managing the last 12 months. And I just wanted to wrap up really quickly with this slide. We know there's kind of many reasons that we find when we speak to our clients about why they've looked towards outsourcing their payroll. And the slide here provides some of the main feedback that we've come across. In recent years, many organisations have expanded operations to new international locations, and this combined with a lack of skilled payroll expertise, an underestimation maybe of skills and the effort that's required to maintain modern cloud payroll platforms, has led many to kind of seek third-party solutions and expertise for ensuring accurate, timely and compliant payroll execution. And it's fair to say we've seen an unprecedented, and I actually read an article the other day that said that, we're ready for things to get back to precedented, which made me smile. But we've certainly seen an unprecedented amount of change over the world in the last 12 months. And it's no wonder organisations are reaching out to global payroll suppliers to support their needs. And here at ADP, we've supported over 860,000 clients worldwide. As Lorna mentioned earlier, 58,000 associates covering over 140 countries. So with so much to think about when you're looking at a multi-country payroll solution, I really hope that you found the session today insightful and helpful. And of course, if you'd like to get in touch with ADP directly and have a more in-depth discussion, please make sure you reach out. We'll make sure that we send out a copy of the Forrester report with the link to the calculator as well to attendees after the webinar. So Mel, I'll hand back back over to yourself. I don't know whether we've had any audience questions.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got time because we've got just a couple of minutes. We've got one here. So how did ADP manage to adapt to the rapid legislative changes due to COVID? Is that something that you could potentially answer in a couple of minutes?
I'll certainly give it a go. But yeah, so answering that quickly, we manage compliance requirements. That's what we do. We've got to make sure our solutions and our knowledge is kept up to date to provide that service and technology to our clients. So it's something that we do on a regular basis, and we've got the advantage in the UK. We have one of our senior business analysts is actually part of the Employment and Payroll Group advisory board, so they advise the HMRC, and during COVID they were actually providing consultations and guidance to HMRC, just pointing out any kind of questionable approaches or points for them to consider. So we had that advantage during that time, but actually PAYE didn't change, so our solution always remained compliant. So our focus was very much on, again, providing advice to clients on how they could use our product to get the information out they needed to be able to make those claims against COVID, etc. For furlough. But just that was the case in the UK, but that wasn't necessarily the case across our countries globally. And I know there was a lot of work that needed to be done in other countries. So our R&D teams had to react very quickly to the increase in changes on the legislation, which meant that there was a lot of additional time and effort that needed to go into that under really difficult circumstances. But as I said, that's what we do. We've got to deliver compliant, high quality solutions to our clients. Does that answer the question, Melanie?
That does.
2 minutes. That was a challenge.
And I'm so sorry you didn't have very long to answer that. So that was sorry about that, but you answered it perfectly. Okay. Thank you very much. So we have come to an end. So apologies to start off with the technical issues, but thank you both for attending the webinar today. It was really informative. Really enjoyed it. Obviously, if the audience has any questions, then you have my email address. So please feel free to email me, and I will forward them on. Any questions we haven't been able to answer today, we will come back to you. As Gabrielle said, you'll be sent a copy of the slides and also the document from Forrester. And so thank you all once again, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So thank you, Lorna and Gabrielle.
Thanks very much, Mel. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.